Here is the latest Higher Summits forecast brought to you by our friends at the Mount Washington Observatory.
Weather above treeline in the White Mountains is often wildly different than at our trailheads. Before you hike, check the Higher Summits forecast at mountwashington.org. Weather observers working at the nonprofit Mount Washington Observatory write this elevation-based forecast every morning and afternoon. Search and rescue teams, avalanche experts, and backcountry guides all rely on the Higher Summits forecast to anticipate weather conditions above treeline. You should too. Go to mountwashington.org or text forecast to 603-356-2137.
And here's your forecast for Friday, December 1st and Saturday, December 2nd. Friday, mostly in the clouds under mostly cloudy skies. Isolated snow showers early, then afternoon mixed precipitation likely. Snow accumulations of trace to 2 inches, with a high in the upper 20s. Winds west at 50 to 70 miles per hour early, 45 to 60 miles per hour midday, and 35 to 50 miles per hour later. And the wind chill will be 5 to 15 above. Friday night, in the clouds with snow. Additional snow accumulations of trace to 2 inches, with a low in the lower 20s. Winds west at 35 to 50 miles per hour early, 45 to 60 miles per hour, with gusts up to 70 miles per hour around midnight, and 25 to 40 miles per hour later. Wind chill will be falling to 5 below to 5 above. And then Saturday, in the clouds with snow, possibly mixing with sleet and freezing rain during the afternoon. Additional snow accumulations of trace to 2 inches, possible ice accumulation from freezing rain of a trace to 1/10 of an inch. Highs will be in the upper 20s. Winds will be southwest at 25 to 40 miles per hour, decreasing to 15 to 30 miles per hour later. Wind chills rising to 5 to 15 above.
Broadcasting from the Woodpeckers studio in the great state of New Hampshire, welcome to the Sounds Like a Search and Rescue podcast, where we discuss all things related to hiking and search and rescue in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Here are your hosts, Mike and Stump.
We go, Stomp. We are back from Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving.
Yep. Did you have your turkey?
Yeah, we sure did. Yeah, the folks came over and we stuffed ourselves, had a really nice lazy day watching that new Squid Games show on Netflix. It was fun. But
that game is fantastic.
Yeah, you see the new show?
I've been watching it, yeah. I just watched the newest episode. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's wicked cool. Can't wait for the next batch to come out. So that was fun. And I think I gained like 3 pounds.
yeah, me too. All that weight I lost, I think, is back.
Right.
All right, so we've got Ken here. He's just working through some technical stuff. Are you all set, Ken? You want to say hi?
Hi. Glad to be here.
All right. Welcome from Texas, right? You in Texas right now?
Yeah, Houston, Texas.
All right. Well, it's warmer down there than it is up here. I can guarantee you that. So, all right, Stomp. So quickly, before we do the intro, I just wanted to pick off a story that it came by that I thought was interesting. And I don't know if you can do this or not, Stomp, but when we're doing the edit, if you can put the Sopranos intro music on behind me, that would be great. But 5 men charged with murder. Apparently, these are 5 New York City residents that apparently killed the guy and brought him up to Twin Mountain, New Hampshire, and buried the body somewhere in the forest.
Wow. That's crazy.
So, yeah, it's a wild indictment. So I'll include this in the show notes if people want to read. The thing I was looking for in the indictment, this is a grand jury indictment, I wanted to get more details about exactly where they buried the body in Twin Mountain. But can you imagine like going hiking and you see like 5 gangsters like burying a body somewhere?
Yeah, I know. You just never know.
New fear is unlocked.
Yeah. So any interesting details in this indictment?
So this happened on July 19th, 2023. It looks like it is a criminal enterprise out of Queens, New York. So Chinese nationals, it looks like they were doing a ketamine drug dealing ring. So ketamine, I think, is called Special K. It's like one of those drugs that they use at like raves and stuff. So you probably know all about that stuff, Stomp.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
That's your world. But I don't know. Apparently this guy owed money and they asked him to come to a restaurant. They met him out and then got him somewhere in New York. It's unclear when he actually was killed, but somehow they convened a grand jury and I guess the grand jury went from July 31st of this year for a couple of days, and then they've arrested 5 suspects.
Yeah.
And one of the guys' nicknames is Little Fatty.
Okay.
And then there's some other names that are really hard to pronounce, but I'll include it in the show notes. But I just thought that was a new fear unlocked. Like you're minding your own business, you're going hiking, middle sugar bush or something like that, and you've got these gangsters burying a body in the middle of the trail.
Yeah. Well, it happens.
Certainly does.
Crazy.
All right. Yep. All right, Stomp. So welcome to episode 131 of the Sounds Like a Search and Rescue podcast. This week we are joined by Ken Lindbloom from Texas Search and Rescue. So Ken is a volunteer with TexSAR and has a background in emergency and disaster management. So his particular area of interest is medical care for working canine dogs. So Ken's done a couple of research projects on canine operational medicine and is joining us tonight to explain the who, what, why, and how of developing a formal pre-hospital medical program for search and rescue canines. So to put this simply, basically when rescue dogs need medical help, how do SAR teams get enough medical training to make sure that the dogs are treated until they can get to a medical facility?
Yeah.
And there's a lot more to it, but that is what we're going to dive into. So in addition to the canine segment with Ken, we'll be ranking the AMC Huts, recapping our recent live episode at Reklis. We have follow-ups on eye protection that we talked about, not getting your eyes sunburned, a story about spite houses, a story about a very loyal Jack Russell Terrier, some recent hikes on the Belknaps, Kinsmans, and a bushwhack on Mount Deception. We'll talk about winter hiking plans, and if we have time, we'll cover some recent search and rescue news. So I'm Mike.
And I'm Stomp. Let's get started.
This is Ben Pease from Hiking Buddies. We are a 501c3 nonprofit committed to reducing avoidable tragedies through education, impactful projects, and fostering a community of support. You can find out more at hikingbuddies.org. We wanted to say thank you to those who have supported our mission, and most importantly, say thanks to those who speak up, who ask questions, and who are willing to provide guidance and assistance on the trails when needed. You embody what it means to be a hiking buddy. And now, for all my newer hikers out there, here's this episode's Hiking Buddies Quick Tip.
For every hike you plan, you should know your bailout routes before you go. Know where you can get down, where you will come out, and how you will get back to your vehicle. Preparing for a worst-case scenario is excellent practice.
All right, Stomp. So I wanted to put pressure on you immediately.
I'm
You
ready.
need to rank the AMC Huts in order of good to bad.
Good to bad. Wow.
Yeah. So Ken,
interesting.
just so you know what we're talking about here, in New Hampshire, where we focus on, there's the Appalachian Mountain Clubs, and the section of New Hampshire that the Appalachian Trail runs through. There's a series of mountain huts where hikers can basically stay in the wilderness. These huts usually, they have caretakers, and there's usually like maybe 30 to 100 sleeping spots, and then they offer food and stuff like that. And they're sort of like a staple for hiking. So what I'm asking Stomp to do is to rate his favorite to least favorite in order.
Well, can I ask a question there?
Yeah. Go ahead.
That sounds like the sort of thing. It kind of makes me think of rest stops. Is that the sort of thing that invites drug use and crime?
No. There's no drug use or crime. It's essentially, if you're a purist in the wilderness, you sort of feel like they shouldn't be there, and people should be doing like backcountry camping and things like that. So it's a little bit of a luxury way for people to go outside and experience. Camping without having to bring a tent or anything like that. Like they have sleeping pads and things like that you can, so it's sort of a halfway between camping and staying in a hotel. And it also serves for day hikers. You can get water there, or you can step inside to get out of the cold weather, but they're really deep. I mean, they're usually like a couple miles in, so you have to hike to them. There's no easy access. So that avoids the riffraff for the most part, although there was a case where somebody had taken a lot of acid a couple of years ago and climbed up on the roof and was screaming at people naked.
Oh.
So that does happen. But
Not the kind of nature you're probably looking for out there.
exactly. Yeah, he had a rough time. But Stomp, first I want to know, what's the criteria you're going to use, and then what is your order?
Sure. So, I mean, my criteria would be less crowds or less crowding, a feeling of spaciousness. Hospitality is never a question with the hut, so I won't include that. Views, and not necessarily above tree line views, but just the surroundings themselves. And that feel of remoteness. I really look for that feeling that you're in the middle of nowhere. So those are a few of my criteria that I would judge these by.
Okay.
And I'm doing this off the cuff. So do you want number one, my favorite?
Yeah.
And then we'll go from there. Okay, my favorite is Carter Notch Hut.
Okay.
That's number one. Number two would be Lonesome Lake.
Okay.
Number three is Lake of the Clouds.
Okay.
Number four would be Greenleaf.
Okay.
Then Madison Spring, Galehead, Zealand, and then Mizpah. I've never been to Mizpah, so I really don't have an opinion on Mizpah.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, that's interesting. I think that my criteria is similar to yours. So I'm thinking views, number one, remoteness, number two, and then sort of nearby landmarks is number three. So I would say for me, I would put Lonesome number one for me.
Wow. Okay.
I just feel like that area is just so fantastic. It's right,
Sure.
right below Mount Washington. Then I would put Zealand as number two. And the reason I put Zealand as number two is just because it's such a cool chill area in the nice weather, because you can sort of put your hammock out, hang out by that water area there, and it's pretty fun. Mm-hmm. Then I would say probably Madison Spring. And I'm writing these down as we're talking just so that I can put them in the show notes. And then I would go with Greenleaf. And so what I got? Lonesome, Zealand, Madison, Greenleaf, Galehead.
Sure. Yeah.
Mizpah. And then I've got Lonesome. and then Carter Notch is my bottom one. So we're almost the exact opposite.
That's interesting.
So I don't like Carter Notch because it's just, I don't know. It's just like a very steep hike down to it and then a very steep hike up to it. And then Carter Dome is just underwhelming to me.
Okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. But the notch itself is incredible.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, when you're coming down from Wildcats and you get that overlook view. But a lot of the consideration that I factored in here was in winter. I've been to most of these places in winter, and of course, as you know, there are only a few that are open in winter, and they're just so romantic and beautiful and just not crowded. And those top 3 of mine definitely are just incredible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I do agree with that. I think that it is cool in the winter, especially Lonesome Lake. Although when the Boy Scouts hit Lonesome Lake, it's just a nightmare. Yeah,
and of course, Lake of the Clouds is not open in the winter, but there is that dungeon underneath. Had some great memories there.
All right. Well, I've got these written down, Stomp, so that we can put them on a little Instagram story so people can yell at us for getting them wrong.
Right. All right.
All right. So next article that we have up here, Stomp, you pulled this. The Auto Road sets a fundraising record. So this is related to the Northeast Delta Dental Mount Washington Road Race. So Ken, for your from your education, so in the Northeast we have this high peak which is called Mount Washington. It's like 6,288 feet high, and it's like the highest mountain around, and there's a 7.9 mile road that you actually can drive cars up, and once a year they have a road race where you can run up. So Stomp and I have participated in this race a number of years. Stomp actually did it this year. I couldn't do it because I broke my toe right before the race, but they raised $62,000 for this race, and it's going to support the oral health needs of North Country residents, which is great.
Absolutely cool. Yeah. Amazing.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Coos County great. Family Health Services. Super cool.
Yeah. And the road's 7.6 miles, not 7.9. But that's good news. So raising a lot of money. And then Stomp next up. And Ken, I'd be curious to know if you have a lot of these issues, but selfie taking is now considered a public health risk. What is this all about?
Yeah, it's a little bit of the obvious. I pulled this out of a Boston station, and we all know that it's a problem. We've seen some crazy things, but there's been research that's been done recently out of the University of Sydney, and they have found that this selfie taking is definitely a public health issue. And I don't know what they're going to do about it, but it's an interesting article, and it does reference selfie-related deaths. Now, that is an interesting thing, because if you do some digging, you can find some horrible videos online about that. And then, of course, we all know the benign ones where somebody walks into a pothole and things like that, but it's starting to get noticed, which is interesting.
Yeah, and it says in this article here, and I don't know, maybe this isn't surprising. I got to warn my daughters, but it says that the average age of deaths related to selfies was 22.
Right,
and that,
right.
As they drilled down, young females were implicated the most, which I feel like that makes sense. So,
does it?
I feel like they're more likely to take selfies.
I suppose so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I take selfies every once in a while, but not very frequently.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, you got to get that dopamine.
Yeah, I've read about a few of those. I haven't heard of any big public incidents like that here in Texas. You know, we get some dementia walkaways, occasionally calls from Big Bend when a hiker goes missing, things of that nature. A kid with autism wanders off, but fortunately, I haven't heard. I haven't heard of too much self-inflicted accidents like that.
That's good.
Yeah, I wonder a lot of times, like if there's injury, a lot of times when there's injuries around waterfalls or cliffs and things like that, we've covered a number of stories where it was indicated that people weren't paying attention close to those areas, and you double click into that and you find out that like they were taking photos or just weren't aware of their surroundings. So I think the phone can be a distraction regardless of whether you're by a cliff or not. It can be dangerous. So Very good, Stomp. And then you've got an update here, Stomp. We covered this before, but I think there's more detail. So the current administration, I'm assuming this is like the Bureau of Land Management, there's a plan for them to release 7 grizzly bears near a rural community in, where is this? This is in Washington, yeah. So this is an area that does not have grizzly bears right now, and they're proposing that they're going to release 7 of them. And this is an apex predator, obviously, getting put in a new area. And the locals, as you can imagine, are not too thrilled about it. They're worried about their livestock, and they're probably worried about themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. So the struggle goes on between the community members and the government agents, and the plan is to release one every year or so into the rural region where these folks live, and it could disrupt their cattle, whatever, their own personal well-being as well. So we'll see what happens with this one, but it's an interesting story.
Yeah, and it looks like they've already introduced wolves to this area, and it's had an impact on livestock. So it's mostly ranchers, I think, that are pushing back on it. But there's some data in here that says that grizzly bears are 20 times more dangerous than black bears and are well known for their aggressive, fatal mauling. So
government inaction.
I will specifically avoid any national parks and going backcountry camping if they have grizzlies in them. So I won't be going there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
All right. Stomp and Ken, have you guys ever heard of a spite house? Have you ever heard of that?
No. What's that?
No.
Is that anything like a trap house?
No, it's like, so spite means that you're looking to get revenge. So the best example I can give you is like there's certain houses in cities like New York and Chicago where developers would like take these huge skyscrapers, and then you'll see this like little tiny house that's never been sold in between these 2 skyscrapers because the owner refuses to sell it, or sometimes there's situations where somebody will, they'll have a property where somebody gives it to them, but it's like really narrow and they can't build anything. So they build like this super narrow house just to be a pain in the neck. Right. So where I live is, it's in the North Shore of Massachusetts. So there's a town next to me called Newburyport that has what's called the Spite House. So it's known as the Pink House. And Stomp, I wanted to pull this article just because I thought it was interesting because it ties with U.S. Fish and Wildlife.
Sure.
So the story behind the Spite House is that in the 1920s, a husband and wife were married, and they went through a divorce. And as part of the divorce settlement, the wife received the rights to have a house built that was the same specifications of the house that she had been living in downtown Newburyport with her husband. There was no information or there was no stipulations around where that house would be built. So the house was built on a salt marsh along the Parker River. So this is essentially, I think the best way to think about this, Ken, for you down in Texas would be this is sort of like the flats down in Galveston, like stick it in the middle of like those salt flats down there. Essentially, this house was built and prone for flooding and things like that. And the wife was essentially stuck having to live in this house where it's like in the middle of nowhere, out in the salt marshes, surrounded by like a river and storms and things like that. So that was the legend around it, and it's been in existence for the last 100 years or so. It's been abandoned for like 50 years now.
Yeah, I know this place.
Yeah, you know it. It's as you enter Plum Island.
Right.
It's an iconic photo prop, I guess is what you would call it. So there's been a preservation group that's been trying to like restore it, and a couple of times it's been up for demolition. Surprisingly, there was an announcement by U.S. Fish and Wildlife to demolish it, and they gave it basically like a 30-day comment period for people to respond. So the local preservationists are pushing to save this icon. So it's an interesting situation where the preservationists are scrambling to try to find like a piece of property that they can trade with Fish and Wildlife that would be equivalent so that they can take it over. So,
Gotcha.
but they're pissed because Fish and Wildlife didn't indicate anything around looking to destroy it. And it came out of nowhere. So there's a lot of sort of political infighting around it, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I've seen it all my life. Going out there.
Yeah. No, the funny thing is the whole story about the origin story about the husband and wife being divorced and him building her the house out of spite is actually not true. The truth behind it is that the husband had a mistress that lived in town. He built the house outside of town where him and his wife would live with their kid. Very quickly, like he started to, when they moved in, it was only like a week or two when he moved in, he started leaving to go work in town, left the wife and the kid in the home by themselves. She sort of figured like, oh, something's going on. Eventually, she found out that he was having an affair and left to go move in with her family back down in Salem, Mass. And they went through a divorce, and the husband and his new mistress got married and had a kid, and they used the house as like a summer home. So the whole story about it being a spite house was like sort of true, but not really. So
Gotcha.
Interesting legend.
Oh boy.
So, but I'll keep everyone updated on what
spite.
happens. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he just basically used it to make his wife so miserable that she'd leave him. So
It's pretty awful.
yeah, excellent. So that's about spite houses. So, all right, Stomp. What else you got?
Well, we have a heartwarming story that is about a little pup. Oh,
Yeah, you want to cover this one?
Yeah, this is fantastic. It's really neat. So there's a Jack Russell Terrier in the news, and this pup is a hero. It's super cool. The dog, after 72 days of loyal watch, she bared her teeth and barked at the hunter who stumbled upon her on his body. So apparently, an individual passed, but the dog stayed next to the body for that amount of time. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah. So this happened in Colorado in the San Juan Mountains. So it was a 71-year-old hiker went out hiking with his Jack Russell Terrier, Finney. And apparently the gentleman's name was Richard Moore. He passed away due to hypothermia, and Finney stayed by the body for 72 days until a hunter stumbled upon the scene.
Pup.
And yeah, I think the dog lost like half its body weight, but it stuck by its owner.
Yeah, unbelievable. Can you imagine? That's a long time.
Yeah, it's crazy. So if that happened to you, Stomp, and you had one of your cats with you, what do you think the likelihood of the cat sticking around would be?
Very, very low. Very low.
None.
Well, actually, they'd be 10 pounds heavier, actually.
It probably would be. Yeah, that's my thought, too.
Yeah, too crazy. Ken, what's your take on this story?
The dog story?
Yeah.
That's more of a fan of German Shepherds myself.
That's funny.
But you got to respect a little guy's loyalty, though.
Yeah. You do.
Yeah. Is that like, actually, let me ask you a question. We're going to get into this eventually, but is there any value in small dogs for search and rescue to get into like smaller areas, or is it always just these bigger dogs?
So that's an interesting question, because when you start sizing up the dog, you could bring a small dog in there, but you're not going to see. You're probably not going to see like a Papillon or something super tiny like that. You can run larger dogs, but the larger dogs, they're going to need more water. They could potentially do differently in heat. They can react differently to age, injury, and environmental factors. Yeah. So I've seen most of the dogs I've seen are on the smaller side. I've seen a few people start with big dogs, but the handlers that I've worked with or gotten to talk with, they all seem to run like medium-sized dogs. Like, like we have a German Shepherd, not a SAR dog, a pet that is like my wife says it's called a king-size German Shepherd. And I've seen German Shepherds on the team. But they're not massive German Shepherds like ours. They're, a couple sizes down.
Yeah, interesting. Because I just figured, like, if you're in an area where you have like thicker vegetation, then I would think maybe like a smaller dog might be able to get their way in there. But
So I've got a story about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I was on this search. We were looking for a prison inmate supposedly had knowledge of where a cold case where a child was murdered and buried, and we were out searching this dam, and it was really thick brush in this dam area. Not dam like concrete dam; it's an earthen dam, more like a reservoir. And we're out there hiking through the woods, and the handler that I was working with, he had two dogs, both black labs, and one is smaller and female, and the other, her name is Alta, and the other is larger. His name is Orion, and he'd bring out two dogs so we could rotate them. One gets worn out, gets overheated. He can put it back in the truck, let it cool off. He pulls out the other dog. Well, Alta, being small, we'd come up across some heavy brush, and she would, just slide right under it. But Orion, being a big dog, you would think he would have a problem with this. But I watched this dog as we walked into this wall of thorns. I see the handler, like hacking and struggling his way through these thorns. And there's a field over on the left-hand side. And I saw Orion look at the handler and then look over at the field and then look back over to the handler, and you could see the gears turning in the dog's head. Like, screw this. I'm not going through the thorns. Yeah. He knew where the handler was going, but he just like walked out into the open field and went around to meet up with the handler. Yeah. So, the big dogs, maybe it's not always a disadvantage. They can be pretty smart.
Yeah, well, they can probably cover a lot more ground too, I would think. So, well, interesting. Well, we'll do a deep dive into that stuff in a minute. But Stomp, you had a couple of reminders. I guess people are communicating to you. You're going to warn them that we only respond to certain ways.
Yeah, just save your effort. A lot of people are trying to get a hold of us through YouTube, and it's just not a convenient way to communicate. I would stick with Instagram or the Facebook pages for the podcast if you could. We do see them, but don't expect a response. So just a little note.
Yeah, and expect a slow response on Facebook because I'm horrible. But Stomp, you're so good at you're the best at social. Like, I appreciate that you cover that because you're always so good keeping in touch with everybody. I think I do have to respond to one message on Instagram. I'll get to that eventually. So
okay,
I'm so bad.
Yeah, it's all good.
Anyway, but all right. So then we had the last show that we recorded was a live show at Reklis. So Ken, just for you, we did like a live show, which was a fundraiser for search and rescue. And we did a 5K race before that, and it was a fun day. But Stomp, what do you think? Any special memories? Any comments about the Reklis show?
Oh, I thought it was fantastic. Reklis has always gone out of their way to support search and rescue, and this event in particular was to support the New Hampshire Outdoor Council. And it was well attended. It was a ticketed event, which is the first for us, and it sold out within like a day or two. So that was pretty neat. All the guests were phenomenal, and the word is that they raised $1,500 by ticket sales. And as you know, a percentage of the full conditions brew that they formulated with Ty Gagne, the author, a percentage of that will also go to the New Hampshire Outdoor Council. So all in all, it was a really successful event, and just wanted to thank everybody that came out.
Yeah, everyone was great. Like, Floki and Mel were great. Daryl was great. I could have talked to Wayne for another 5 hours. We got to get him on the show. Ty was great. Ken was fantastic. Reklis Steve. Yeah. Cindy Lynn. Everybody was fantastic.
Yeah, and as compared to other shows or other guests that we've had on, there seemed to be a level of openness and depth to the conversation at this show that I've not experienced that often on the podcast. I was really floored by what people were talking about and what they were willing to reveal about certain events that have happened over the last few years in the region. So it was a really neat show.
Yeah. And as nervous as I get about these shows, like I definitely felt more comfortable once we hit record and we started talking. But I do get, it's a little freaky having people watch you. I like this environment better where it's just like, it feels like a work call to me. So I don't think about it as much, but it was fun.
Yeah. And this is the first show that you'll get to hear the actual applause from the audience. And just wanted to thank Reklis Steve for the idea. He thought, hey, why don't you ditch the canned applause that you do after the show intro and use the actual crowd? So that's what you heard tonight on this episode, the actual crowd cheering. So pretty neat.
Are you ready for Slasher's Gear Review?
Moving on here, Stomp, you've got a couple of gear review things you want?
Yeah, just in time for Christmas. So we have 2 items. The first one is a SAS Squatch Call. So if you're in the woods and you want to have a Yeti or a Sasquatch come to your location, you buy this little digital 8-bit analog device that will send out Sasquatch calls, and you'll be all set. You get that grainy picture on your camera and show everybody on Instagram. It's going to be wicked cool.
Does that come with a guarantee that I'll see Sasquatch?
Well, Ken, that's what I wanted to ask you is, do you have Sasquatch in Texas?
I've never looked for Sasquatch or hung out with anyone who has been looking for Sasquatch.
My understanding is that Texas has their own, like you guys have what's called the chupacabra. Have you heard of that before?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, the blood sucking. It sucks the blood of goats. Something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, you guys have that. So, have you seen one of those before?
Yeah. No, but I've seen a pretty ugly looking cat.
Okay, well, we'll see. But if we'll check out the Sasquatch whistle here, and if it works out well, we'll see if we can reach out to the owners to see if they can get a chupacabra call going for you.
That's just what we need.
Exactly.
That's so great.
Right about now, Ken's like, what did I sign up for?
Yeah. There's so much for my reputation.
That's great.
And this second one is great. This is another stocking stuffer. Thanks, Mountain Mike, for this one. He sent along a gear review that is pretty cool. It's called the Crap Strap. It's KRAPP. And the Crap Strap is a sling that you wrap around a tree and put around your waist, and it lets you sort of lean back and hover to do your business. And it comes at a staggering cost of $49.95.
Well, I guess
is that intended to convince the wife or girlfriend to go camping with you?
I don't know.
That's a good idea. It could be a selling point, actually.
You know what I'm thinking, though, Stomp? If somebody was...
I don't see that convincing my wife.
No, that's not going to do it. But you know what I'm thinking about, guys, is we're going to talk about dogs tonight.
It's not.
Yeah.
I think that this Crap Strap could potentially double as a rescue sling for a dog. So the rescue sling people should take a look at this and see if they can re-engineer their what is it? What's the rescue sling called again that we have for dogs?
Oh, Pack-a-Paw.
Yeah, the Pack-a-Paw group should see if they can add an attachment so that you can use the Pack-a-Paw as a crap strap. And then you have, 2 products in one.
Yeah, multiple use. That's super cool.
Honestly, I would fall into the toilet paper in this thing. I wouldn't be able to hold that position for more than 5 seconds.
Oh, come on. You're a hiker. You could handle this.
All right.
But it's awesome. There's the picture of the crap strap. It shows a mannequin. It's a mannequin in this position. You got to check it out. It's great.
I feel like somebody should just set that up at a trailhead.
That'd be awesome. Oh, man.
Well,
too funny.
That's going to be on the Instagram story, Stomp.
I'll do that. Yeah. Oh, boy. So we'll get tagged for copyright for Sopranos and then for this image.
Yes. Okay.
Hey, what's that sound? It must be time for the pop culture segment with Mike and Stomp.
Pop culture. We got a couple things to mention here. And I don't know if you looked at the Instagram lately, but the story is full of listeners that have been posting their Spotify Wrapped images of their minutes that they've listened to the podcast, and it's really flooring. It's so nice to see all these people listening to the podcast so much. It's great. So
it is nice to see them listen to the podcast. It's concerning that people have that much free time on their hands.
Yeah. Like some of the time is like 15,000 minutes and this and that. It's hilarious. But again, thank you very much. Did you look at your Wrapped? I didn't even know about this thing until about a week ago.
I haven't looked. What is it? Is it Spotify or is it?
It's on Spotify, and it's just like a yearly review of your listens, your interests, your highest, most popular songs that you listen to, and this and that. So it's very cool.
No, I haven't looked at it yet.
Yeah. Check it out. It's good. So again, thanks everybody for listening to the podcast. As Mike says, we don't know why anybody listens at all, but we appreciate it. And moving on, I discovered a cool documentary, and it's cool in the sense that it gives you, it's a terrible story. It's about the 1982 Alpine Meadows avalanche, which is a ski resort that I think has been since renamed in the Tahoe region of California. But it's interesting in the sense that they go into avalanche mitigation, the daily efforts of I don't know if they're the ski patrollers or whatnot, but they use cannons and artillery basically, and all these different methods to try to prevent avalanche. But unfortunately, in 1982, there was one that struck the actual base, and several people died. There was one survivor that was buried for days, apparently. So it's a really neat documentary, worth checking out.
Yeah, I see this. I've seen this on my recommended shows to watch. I'm too busy with Squid Games right now, but I will check this out. So
I gotcha.
Okay.
Last but not least.
And then Stomp, our friend Al sent in a link to a 15-minute podcast if anyone wants to check it out. So we had covered a story, I think 2 episodes ago about a DJ that had used, what were the lights that he used, Stomp, that caused eyeball sunburn?
I think they were high-powered LEDs, but they were burning out people's retinas and whatnot.
Yeah. So definitely remind people, and I had to do this weekend. So the higher summits are snow covered, and when the sun's out and it's reflecting off the snow, like you do need to make sure that you watch out for your eyes. So make sure that you're wearing eye protection. But Al sent over a link to a podcast that talks about. It kind of does a deep dive into burning eyes in the outdoors, and it's the podcast is called Advanced Wilderness Life Support, and it's the University of Utah School of Medicine. So they do a 15-minute podcast about burning eyes in the outdoors and how to protect your eyes and what the right glasses are. So if you want to geek out on that, it's a pretty interesting episode.
Excellent. Yep. I hate wearing goggles. Or any glasses.
You got to do it, though. You got to do it.
Yeah. That's so frustrating. All right. Well, yeah, thank you, Al. This Al, I'll have to meet this person sometime or another. I keep on thinking it's fantastic. AI. Thanks, AI.
Yeah, no, it's Al. It's all because he's asking that because in the script I always say thanks, Al, but it looks like AI, but it's just
right. Thank you. So moving on, we have free stickers if anybody's interested at Ski Fanatics off of exit 28 in Campton, New Hampshire. It's their new building just behind the post office or adjacent to the post office and Dunkin' Donuts as you come off the exit. Or you can go to Spinner's Pizza Parlor, just minutes off of Route 93 Dascombe Road in North Andover. It's the #1 voted pizza in the area. Family owned since 1994. So you can go visit Dolls and Pops and say hi and get your selfie, but just watch out when you're taking that selfie. Let's see, we want to give a shout out to Reklis for all their support. A special thanks to them. You'll enjoy the best food, craft beer, and fun just 15 minutes from Franconia Notch, many 4,000 footers in less than 10 minutes from the 5 corners. And donation time. We've had a couple donations over the last several days while we were off. Thank you, John Huck, for donating 8 coffees to us. Thank you. Paul donated 20. Thank you very much, Paul. It's great to see you at the show. And Stacy Tardif donated 5 coffees as well. Thank you, Stacy. And quick healing to you to get you back on the trail, okay? And that's all we got for donations.
Great people, great people. Hey, Stomp, this is the part of the show where we talk about what beer we're drinking. But before we do that, I'm going to forget to do this, so I just wanted to give you a heads up. I'll put this in the show notes, but our friend Dave Dillon from Chase the Summit, he was on the show. He's got his own podcast. He's an ultra runner.
Yeah.
He is a tech guy. He posted something on his own Facebook page the other day. So he does a video podcast. He was able to use an AI system where he uploaded sample video of himself as well as, some voice samples. And then he went into AI and had them created essentially like a 2 to 3 minute video talking about a particular subject. And none of it is him. It's completely AI generated, from the backdrop to the video of him with his arms moving to the content to the voice. I mean, literally, like he's like, I got to raise the alarm on this, because this is getting to be like to the point where, if I can do this based on a 2-minute sample, anybody could fake anything with AI. So
how long is
we've been talking
clip?
about this a lot. It's like a 2-minute clip or so. I'll put it on. I'll send it over to you, Stomp. I don't know if he wants me to release it in the show notes, but
Sure.
AI is getting to the point where it's crazy. Like, we could literally just do a show on AI, and I think it would be, if we did it on video, like, I don't know if people would be able to tell the difference. So
yeah, that's freaky. It's like, what is going to happen here over the next few years?
It's crazy.
There's probably some application there in search and rescue that hasn't been thought of. If you use AI in conjunction with open source intelligence, that could potentially be useful for certain kinds of searches.
Well, we did a story, I think it was 2 shows ago, Ken, where there's a startup company in, I think, Hong Kong. It's some researchers have combine drone footage with AI to essentially, how like they'll crowdsource like looking at satellite photos. This is basically putting up a drone and then taking photos of the area and then using AI to identify humans in that area there. So they are starting to use that technology.
So we've done something like that, a search where we were looking for human remains, and some really, really high-res drone footage was taken and then fed to AI.
Right.
And AI attempted to identify human remains. It generated a lot of false positives, just a lot of shiny white things. Some of them were bones, a lot of them were bones, but they were animal bones, and the other things were just, oil derricks, pieces of oil field equipment. So semi-successful there.
Yeah, but it's interesting, like the thing about this example of, and I'll email it to you, Ken, too, so you can check it out. But this example of the podcaster creating a video of himself, like basically doing his podcast, the technology is so new, and he was able to do it so that it's such high quality. Like, I can only imagine like 2-3 years from now, like the AI the exercise you just did will probably, they'll be able to fix the false positives pretty significantly, I would think, pretty quickly.
I would think. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole idea with AI. It's just learning and its ability to, improve and everything else, supposedly.
Yeah, it's an interesting world we're moving into here, Stomp. But anyway, are you drinking anything tonight? You got any beers?
I am. I picked up one. I went with your theme motif here, and I picked up a Kinsmen by Resilience. It's by Schilling, but it's their Resilience line. It's a Citra Cryo Cascade and Idaho 7 and 7% alcohol India Pale Ale. It's really good. It's very tasty. I love Schilling anyway.
Nice.
Yeah, what you got?
I have a Treehouse, very hazy. So I went to Treehouse about 2 months ago, and it is a double IPA, 8.6% alcohol. So I'll be slobbering all over myself by the end of the night here. So, and Ken, we didn't prep you. I don't know if you're drinking or if you're just drinking water or whatever, but I don't know if you're a beer drinker, if you have a favorite beer.
I'm more of a martini guy.
Okay, an aristocrat. I like it.
Hey, I'm fancy, and I apologize if I'm stepping over you on my end. There's a bit of an audio delay. When I hear you start and stop talking,
it's all good.
But yeah, I'm a martini guy, and when I'm on keto, I'll drink that low carb Corona stuff.
Oh, there you go.
I like a Corona. Yeah, no, and don't worry about the delay there. We can
work it out.
We can edit stuff. Yep. All right, Stomp. So recent hikes, you've done 2. Do you want to break down where you've been in the whites lately?
Yeah, sure. I've got the fire again, my friend. So the first one, I've got the fire for the New Hampshire Highest 500. And the way I usually tackle these are to find, clumps of them that I can tackle all at once. So I looked south. This was the Thanksgiving weekend, and I honed in on the Belknaps range, not Belknap range. And I decided to go for it. So that Friday after Thanksgiving, I went out and tackled 3 of them. I had planned to do 4, and my plan was to hit Mount Clem, and this is off of the Round Pond area. If I provided a little map there, Mike. I don't know if it'll help, but it was interesting. So started around like 7:54 in the morning, and this is near Gunstock. If anybody has skied there, just to give you a point of reference. So original idea was to hit Mount Clem, which is a short one, and it's part of a loop that comes next to Round Pond. And for some reason, man, this is my biggest complaint with the Belknap range. The signage, the blazing on the trees can be really confusing at times. They use this color-coded rainbow spectrum. And, I understand blazing it for different colors, for different trails and stuff, but what's really freaky is they overlap them sometimes, and then on top of that, you have previous blazes from before the trail turned to a different color. So it can be really confusing. So you got to do your homework. I had a map on me in my phone, didn't really reference it too much, and sure enough, as I was heading to Mount Clem, I diverted onto the the Old Guilford Trail, East Guilford Trail. And that was not my intention. So I ended up going up to Belknap first, Mount Belknap. And at about 2,000, 2,500 feet, I realized that I had taken a wrong turn, but I'm like, okay, let's just get on with this and see what happens. So I ended up going to Belknap, following yellow and red blazes. Mostly barefoot the way up. It wasn't too bad. Early winter type of snow. The fire tower at the top of Belknap is super cool, but it's currently under construction. So that was sort of a bummer. From there, another sort of blunder on Mr. Stomp's side here. I ended up taking a red blaze trail down about 1,000 feet, thinking it was heading towards Gunstock, but it was actually a trail that was heading down to another trailhead. So I turned back up, and I found that behind this dilapidated shed was another trail that actually went over to Gunstock proper. So, yeah, I was totally noobing it, dude. I was just like, yeah, whatever. I'm not going to look at the map. I'm just going to make this up as I go. So it was fun. Made it over to Gunstock, which was really great. And, as I was heading over there, you had to put spikes on. It was super icy, and the snow was maybe traced to 2 inches, but it was just slick, really slick. On the way back, I bumped into a listener and a legend around here, Corey Hempel, who actually it was great seeing Corey. She's so cool, and I met her. I met her dog too, which is her dog's a sweetie.
Oh yeah, I love those dogs. They're so every time she posts a story or something, I'm always looking at the dogs have that smile on their face.
Yeah, Corey's great. So she actually spent a little bit of time with me pointing out the trail system and answered my question, because after Gunstock, which had an amazing view of the lakes and the mountains, I wanted to get over to Piper, and I just wasn't sure if there was an active trail that did that, but she showed me how to get over there. And sure enough, there was an old Piper trail that got over to Piper. So I went to Piper, which blew me away. It was like being on top of Dickey Northern Ledges, just wide open ledges with stone benches and just dramatic views. So it was really cool. After that, I went down this trail, which was called I believe it was called the Piper Connector Trail, which took you back down to Round Pond. And that was a mind blender because at that point I'm getting a little fatigued. And after descending from Piper, maybe 2,000 feet, you're in this deep valley. It decides to ascend again for another several hundred feet. And oh, dude, that was totally unexpected. Looking at the map, you can see it. I think, what was the name of that mountain? It circles some
Whiteface?
Suncook Mountain or something of that nature.
Okay.
Yeah, something like that. So yeah, I was just burnt out by then. So when I finally got back to Round Pond, I still wanted to get Clem. And as I was ascending Clem, my legs were just getting gimpy. So I just decided to bail. So that was about 1:20 in the afternoon. So it was that classic decision point. Do I want to do Clem or just turn back and head down back to the truck? And I, of course, made the stupid call of trying to do Clem. But at least I turned around before trying to get all the way up Clem.
Yeah. I've done the opposite. Like I've hit all those eastern peaks like Clem, Mac, Rand, Quarry, Anna, Straight Back and Major, but I haven't done Belknaps and Gunstock and Piper and Whiteface and those. So I'll get out there. But yeah, that's a cool area. And running into Corey's good. She's like the expert in the Belknaps. So
oh, she sure is. She was zipping. It was just a glimpse of her running by me. A flash. Like, was that Corey? And then number 2 on Sunday, I did another 500 highest, and that was Deception East. So the plan was to hike Mount Deception and Deception East, which are 2 mountains in the Dartmouth range, which are just west of the Presidentials. So Reklis Steve had asked if I wanted to come along for a bushwhack, and I threw out some ideas, and we all decided to meet at Upper Falls on the access road that heads towards the Cog and actually try to do these mountains from the eastern side, which is, when you do your research about this Deception range, everybody does it from Cherry Mountain Pond Road, which at the moment is closed, but it's walkable for, say, 2 to 3 miles until you get to Small Cherry Pond. And then from there, people generally bushwhack up a mile and a half to get to Mount Deception. And these are in the 3,500 to 3,700 range for height. It was an amazing day. We started at 8:40. We generally just wore our spikes the whole way. No snowshoes. I mean, the snow is just too thin until you got to the top, and then we were dealing with about a foot deep snow in the col between the 2 peaks. We got out at 4:11 p.m. So we were at 7.8 miles in basically 7 or 8 hours. It was slow going. I've not been challenged like this since the captain, and the captain is just, maybe half a mile of that. And this was several miles of blowdown fields the size of football fields and just tremendously difficult terrain. But like all good hikes, most good hikes, we got surprising views that just blew us away. There's one view up top of Mount Deception that covers the literal entire Presidentials. You can see all the way from the north to the south, the entire Presidential range from that mountain. It's unbelievable. So if you're a bushwhacker and you're up for some torture and you want a view, that's the one right there.
I need to I got to figure out what the name origin is for that one. I'm curious.
I'd be curious as well. Yeah, it's funny. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, that is. But I'm not surprised you can see the Presidentials from there because it's just sort of it's right in that area. So
yeah. So that's all I got. Yeah, it's good to be out again.
You've been a busy guy here. So I I also got out into the Kinsmen. So my daughter needed a couple of 4,000 footers. So Ken, in the Northeast here, we have we're very into lists. So we have a certain number of mountains that are what we call 4,000 footers. So there's 48 of them in New Hampshire. So we make it a game of summiting all of these mountains, and then it's sort of a badge of honor. So my daughter is pursuing her list. She's at 26 now after this hike. So we did the Kinsmans. We got on trail around 9 in the morning. We stopped at the Hooks at Rest area and loaded up on food, which I love that place, Stomp. Apple cider donuts. So we were feeling great. We met listener Steve, who's been hiking with me all winter, and we've gotten together a couple of times. And then Nobby Hikes was joining us, and then my daughter's boyfriend joined us, and he was like, "I'm going to do it." And I said, "It's going to be a long hike." So I was nervous about him because he's never done a winter condition hike before.
Yeah,
and he did great. It was a little bit slow going, but we got up to Lonesome Lake. And one thing I noticed about Lonesome Lake, I haven't been there in a long time. I camped out there one winter, which was ridiculous, but that is not a place to camp out, because what I realized with Lonesome Lake is that the cold air just sits in the bottom of that like a bowl. So like literally you could feel the difference in temperature when you got to Lonesome Lake compared to what it was like coming up. Yeah. It must be like a 5 or 10 degree difference in the cold weather.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah.
You'd think it'd be sheltered with the wall of mountains to the west.
Yeah, but I think what happens is the really cold air just sits at that low point and just doesn't move. Yeah. So it was pretty chilly, but we got to Lonesome Lake Hut, chilled out for a little while, and then went up fishing Jimmy, put the spikes on, and made our way over. But it was a little bit of a slow hike. And we ended up getting out around 4:30 or so. But when we were heading back, we got back to Lonesome Lake, and it was pretty cool because the moon was rising over Franconia from Lonesome Lake, so we got some good photos.
Oh, beautiful.
Which is cool. And then also, Stomp, we had the weirdest thing happened is that me and my daughter were climbing up to North Kinsman. And as we were climbing up, this was a couple that was headed down, and they were, one of the lady had said, like, sounds like a search and rescue. And then I stopped, and I was like, my daughter turned around, looked at me, like, was shocked.
That's
and
weird.
Then I was like, "Oh, did you say sounds like a search and rescue?" And she's like, "Oh, is that your podcast?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm Mike." And she's like, "Oh my God, that's so great." So we took a selfie, and then I was talking to her friend, and he's connected with AMC in Boston. So I've got to follow up with him, but it was great to meet them, and it was exciting.
Yeah, that's really funny. Good for you.
Yeah. Small world.
Yeah.
And then my daughter was like, "Oh my God, I'm never going to hear the end of this." And I was like, "No, I'm cool. I'm cool."
That's great.
Yep.
Were the trails busy?
Very busy. Yeah, a lot of people out there. So
a lot of people.
It was a perfect day.
How about at the hut? A lot of people there too?
Not that many people at the hut, but just a lot of people on the trails.
Gotcha.
So,
awesome.
All right, Stomp. Let's skip the notable listeners. We'll do that next week because we want to get to Ken. But before we do that, let's do a couple of sponsors here. We've got one new a sponsor that's coming back.
Yeah, let's do it. So Fieldstone Kombucha, welcome back, and we're glad to have you. There's some great news here. So Fieldstone Kombucha, New England's premium craft kombucha company. If you're in the heart of New England, you need to drink a New England-style kombucha. Softer, less acidic, and truly enjoyable. Our kombucha is naturally effervescent and boasts full-bodied flavor. Fieldstone crafts the best seasonal flavors. When we tell you there's blueberries in our Baby Bandit flavor, it nearly turns your tongue blue. Women owned and operated, we brew in Rhode Island using whole, locally sourced ingredients. Fieldstone Kombucha is the perfect replenishing drink after a day on the slopes or a trek in the woods. It's chock full of probiotics and healthy acids to keep you in top form. So find us locally here in New Hampshire at Biederman's in Plymouth, Mad River Coffee House in Campton, the Concord Food Co-op, and more. So check out our website for the full list of New Hampshire and New England-wide locations. Use code SLASHER, that's SLASR, on our website for 10% off an online order. Shipped straight to your door. Visit fieldstonekombuchaco.com.
Excellent, Stomp. So very excited to have Fieldstone back, and I got to go pick some up.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely.
Yep.
Now that it's local, it's like, woo.
Yeah, exactly. It's great. All right, Stomp. So we, just a quick point here. You had a couple of notes here. So I'm going to be finishing up my winter 4,000 footer list coming up this winter. So I've got 3 trips to go. You just tallied up all of your list, and you said you're at 22. So you're going to try to like get some of these done.
I'm going to get cooking on it. Yeah, Mrs. Stomp and I were looking through our old 48 list, and she's at 14, I'm at 22, and we've got the fire under our butts. So we're going to dive in this winter and see if we can't tackle some.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, looking forward to
helping out.
Yeah,
Excellent.
right on.
Awesome.
How many do you have left?
6.
All right, so you're planning on doing these, what, really quick? Like a trip or two?
Yeah. When I get back from Florida, I'm going to bang them all out in January.
Excellent. Wow. Well, if we can line them up, keep in touch and we'll coordinate.
Yeah, I got a big crew actually coming out for Owl's Head, so if you need to do that one, I've got a pretty good group going.
Okay, awesome. Excellent.
Yep.
My favorite. All right, and our final sponsor of the night here before we get to Ken. Do you have a sweat problem, Ken? Sweat can be extremely uncomfortable on the trails.
Well, we got something for you.
This is made for you, brother. So, plus, sweat is a serious risk factor. As your clothes get wet, your core temperature can dramatically fluctuate. This can result in hypothermia, heat exhaustion, and dehydration. So we've got good news here at Slasher for you. There's a piece of gear that solves the sweat problem. Vaucluse's ultralight ventilation backpack frame. The frame is a backpack accessory that easily installs in your favorite pack, size 15 liters to 65 liters, and creates a ventilating airflow gap between you and your pack. It's also ultralight, weighing less than a pair of socks at just over 3 ounces. So whether you're hiking in hot or cold temps, the ultralight ventilation backpack frame is a real game changer when it comes to airflow and ventilation. So visit VaucluseGear.com to order an ultralight ventilation frame today. Use promo code SLASHER, SLASR, to enjoy a $5 discount. Plus, let them know that Mike and Stomp sent you.
Yeah, Nobby had his new version of Vaucluse when we did the Kinsman hike, and then Caroline had hers. I haven't switched mine back over to my backpack, so I was using my bigger gear, so I didn't use it this time. But
gotcha. What did Nobby think?
My large one.
So Generation 2, yeah, good stuff.
Yeah. He said that it felt cool on his back, and that it was comfortable and no sweat issues.
Excellent. Yeah, they're flying off the shelves. We get notifications all the time.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
It's time for Slasher's Guest of the Week. Very cool. Very cool.
All right, so Ken, this is your moment. This is your big segment. You ready to go?
I'm ready.
Excellent. And you said this is your first podcast, right?
Yes, this is my first podcast.
Great. So why don't you start off giving a little bit of an introduction on your background, maybe talk about whether you've done a lot of hiking in your younger days, and then how you got into search and rescue, and then a little bit about your academic background.
Yeah, so I did do a little bit of hiking, nothing like y'all are doing, just undeveloped land near where I grew up. What got me into search and rescue is I got involved in an off-road club that was kind of like the Cajun Navy, but mostly with, lifted trucks and Jeeps and whatnot. And it's a volunteer group called Houston Area Off-Road Recovery. And we went out in the tax day floods to volunteer, and then went out again in Harvey. And in Harvey, I wound up linking up with a group on a boat, and we did a lot of stuff on a boat, did some stuff on a monster truck. My wife basically started a dispatch on Discord for coordinating people. It was a really life-changing experience for me. But even doing that, I knew I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I know I'm getting in over my head. I don't know what the right gear is, but I know I'm not wearing the right gear. And that's when I got bit by the bug. I wanted to keep kind of doing that thing, but I didn't want to keep doing it, with an off-road club. I went through CERT training. I don't know if you're familiar with FEMA's CERT program, and realized that's not where it's. I'm not going to keep doing that same kind of thing with our local CERT teams. And then I found Texas Search and Rescue, and went out to one of their trainings, watched them work with canines. At first, I was really interested in becoming a canine handler, but I knew I wanted to become an EMT. And I realized I'm doing that. I'm also going to school for this graduate degree. It's not realistic for me to become a canine handler after I really grasped how much work and time and money is involved in that. I was already stretching myself thin. So I've been with TexSAR since 2018. I got my EMT basic in 2019. Got my wilderness EMT from Knowles, which is just really fantastic program. Their wilderness upgrade for medical professionals program. And I started working on my graduate degree in emergency and disaster management 2 weeks before Harvey hit. So it was kind of interesting timing, starting that degree and then going out into this big disaster, the very thing I'm researching and studying. And from my experiences in TexSAR, I knew I either wanted to do research on volunteer groups or research into canines. And I found a way to combine the two. And I did a couple different projects while I was working on my graduate degree. And I was very fortunate to have the support of my teammates in TexSAR. They were very supportive, and it helped my research to a great degree. But of course, while I'm on here tonight, I'm speaking for myself and not on behalf of my team.
Yeah. And the sort of the area that you've been most focused on, which is kind of I would assume it's a niche area, but it's a critical area, is when dogs are out in the field, they're obviously at a risk of injury. So a lot of times it's the people that are in search and rescue teams, they have medical training and they've got their wilderness first aid training and things like that, but it's applied towards humans. So your focus is around thinking about, like, how do we triage the dogs if they're injured in the field during their search? Is that correct?
That's correct. That's what I did my research on, taking it from the first aid level to something of a higher standard.
Was anybody thinking about this or talking about this that you were aware of? I have to think that this is something that people would just sort of say, like, well, we can figure things out based on the knowledge that we have in medical procedures for humans, but it's clearly different with dogs. You've got to have specialized knowledge.
So this is where it gets really niche. SAR, I don't believe so, and I'm a native Texan, never lived outside of Texas, only done SAR in Texas, only researched Texas teams. So I don't know if it's different for folks in other parts of the country, but excluding like federal teams, like the USAR teams, and Coast Guard, I don't know if they have dogs, but excluding, paid professionals like that, that doesn't really seem to exist in volunteer search and rescue to the best that I've been able to find. It is more common in law enforcement settings. One of the teams that I encountered in my research, I came across an article about the Orange County Sheriff's Department. And when you get to a big city that has a full-time SWAT team, they have the funding and the resources to have tactical medics on their team. And of course, they also have canines. And they'll take this class that at the paid level like that. They're all paramedics. They're not EMT basics like me. They'll go and they'll take a course. It's based off of guidelines called K9 Tech. That's Tactical Emergency Casualty Care, where you learn to apply basically their paramedic skills to canines. So they already have these skills. They're used to doing them on people, and now they learn to do them on animals. That class is open to laypersons, and some SAR people take that class. Handlers take that class. I took it, and it was very educational, helped my research. But so far from what I've seen in the military setting and law enforcement setting, they're already way ahead thinking on how to handle this problem. But that doesn't seem to be the case when it comes to the volunteer search and rescue.
Yeah, I would imagine that, and I think in New Hampshire, I suspect that in New Hampshire, it's not as common for search and rescue. So I'm not on search and rescue myself. I'm more on the hiking side, but I would suspect it's not as common as you would find in Texas to deploy the K9 units, just because the majority of it's a mix. So a lot of the rescues in New Hampshire are focused on hikers, where you can do sort of litter carryouts, and then there's a fair amount of like ATV, snowmobile activities. There are elderly walk-offs and young people walk-offs and things like that, where I would assume they deploy dogs a fair amount, but probably not at the level of Texas. But can you talk a little bit about, like, you have, I feel like you probably have like flood and hurricane response and more sort of emergency weather events. But can you sort of talk about like what areas of search and rescue are most common in your experience in Texas?
Sure. Being a big team, we've got people that have come to Texas and joined TexSAR from other states, and I've talked to teammates from Arizona and Montana, and seem to be wildly different operating environments and wildly different structures. So it does kind of help to explain how we do things here. Unlike most other states, search and rescue is not a function of a local sheriff's department. Most search and rescue teams are volunteer nonprofit organizations. That's what Texas Search and Rescue is. In my research, I identified 10 volunteer teams in Texas. That was almost all I could find, and I solicited them for participation in some of my research. I also gathered information about them from the web, and TexSAR is a little bit unique in that we have a lot of medical people. We're very medical heavy. We were only one of 2 out of 10 teams that I could find that advertised that capability on their team website, and the other was associated with the fire department. So we're a little bit unusual in that regard, and search and rescue is probably a lot different than what you guys are doing in the mountains. We do hurricane and flood response. We also do event medical support. So there's this one event I've done event medical support for like mountain bike races and things like that. CERT competitions where they do the search and rescue stuff, and there's a possibility of someone getting hurt. And we do large public events. There's a big one down in Galveston every year. Galveston Boulevard Peninsula gets swarmed by tourists that overwhelm the normal resources on the peninsula. And ESD2 often brings us in to provide medical support there. We do incident management stuff. One cool thing I got to do was serve as a liaison in a FEMA exercise with a nuclear power plant, where they did a tabletop exercise at a scenario where there's a disaster that threatens the plant and possibly the plant leading to a bigger safety issue. And I got to serve in an IMT capacity there as a liaison between the team and the local government there. We do a lot of searching for missing persons, dementia walkaways, children with autism, things of that nature that just go walking off. Occasionally, I would describe what we do as wilderness search and rescue, but only in comparison to urban search and rescue. We do occasionally go out to like Big Bend, but wilderness in this context just means a pretty remote area, and maybe it's not the mountains or a trail in the mountains, but it could be an oil field somewhere way out in the middle of nowhere, or a riverbed, hiking through a riverbed after a flash flood. And there's a lot of criminal investigations. That's a major component of it for for us to the point at which the team has grown large enough to afford several paid positions. And we hired a former Texas Ranger to start a missing persons unit to go through cold cases and work with law enforcement to identify opportunities to go out and help with these cold cases and see if we can find people and bring killers to justice.
Wow. And do you, as far as the function of the team, is it like, do you stand by to get a call to say like, okay, we've got to activate a mission, and then you just have to respond back to the lead to say like, okay, I can help with this volunteer assignment? Or do they have, or is it an expectation that you have to respond when they call? Like, do you have the option to say like, I'm too busy to do something? Or is it, I guess I'm curious about like sort of the call out process that you have.
Yeah, so that was we're NIMS compliant. Before you can even get close to being field deployable, you have to take your basic NIMS and ICS courses, learn about incident command and command structure. We don't self-deploy. We only are deployed at the request of state, federal, local government.
That was my question, actually. Thanks for adding this.
Yeah, and a lot of folks, they aren't familiar with TexSAR. They get it confused with other organizations, and sometimes that's a good connotation, and sometimes it's not. But we're very careful to. We try to operate. We call ourselves unpaid professionals. Operate just like the professionals. The only difference is that we're volunteers. We do occasionally, this is rare, but it's really interesting. I never imagined this would happen, but we do occasionally respond to requests from corporations. There's one, I don't know if I can name them, but we have a corporate sponsor that when they go to build a new location, they'll request our K9s to go in and make sure there aren't any bodies there before they build, because if they start building and uncover a body, then that creates a massive headache for them. So they just save themselves the headache by, hey guys, can you come out and take a look for us? We've also gotten called out to do damage assessments after a hurricane went through Louisiana. The storm's name escapes me at the moment, but it was a private emergency management company that handles emergency management and crisis communications for large chains like hardware stores and pet stores, things of that nature. And they reached out to us to go out and get boots on the ground and drones in the air and assess damage to their customers' facilities. So it's mostly state and local, sometimes federal or task forces, but occasionally you get those oddball corporate requests too.
Yeah, that is interesting. I would have never imagined like a private company would say like, sweep this area for human remains so that we don't have to clean up the mess as we start construction. But I would assume that I guess that makes sense. It's just like, it's so rare up in the Northeast area that something like that would happen. But I do feel like, I don't know why, but I do feel like there's more likelihood to find a dead body like down in Texas for some reason. I don't know why, but.
Yeah, and that would, of course, completely grind things to a halt. I don't know if they'd bring out the sheriff or a coroner or who, but they'd have to bring out someone and make an initial assessment of, does this look like it was a crime or someone just naturally passed? Is it a very old grave site, from the 1800s that, isn't marked anymore? And then that would just bring construction to a halt. So it makes sense to ask us to do a sweep before they get started.
Yeah, and then can you talk about the dogs? Are the K9 units like embedded in TexSAR, or are they a separate unit that you engage with based on the specific case that you're dealing with?
Well, we have there's different disciplines, and now they're kind of formalized in a sense, they're formalized into teams. But we're all one TexSAR. When you join a specific team discipline, there's some more oversight and organization specifically surrounding that discipline. That's true for the K9 handlers, just like it's true for the drone team or the medical team.
I'm curious, what's your take on the canine handlers? Is the personality type of the canine handlers, are they all similar, or do they come from sort of a wide background in your opinion?
So, I recently I compiled my research into a presentation, and before pitching it to my team and coming on your show, I presented it to some of our team's handlers to get some feedback. And as I was talking with them afterwards, I said, gee, I really appreciate how much time and effort and money goes into this, and what keeps you guys going when you do lose a dog. And one of the handlers said to me, well, we all have one thing in common. We're single.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So they have the time and effort to focus on a dog versus where they, might otherwise be focusing on more interpersonal relationships. So they're making that sacrifice to the dog.
It's a tremendous amount of time. And, you could train a dog, on the weekends, in evenings, you could certainly do that. Some call outs are scheduled, particularly the criminal investigations. If the law enforcement already knows the person's probably dead, there's no point dragging us out on a weekday. But a lot of other searches, criminal investigations included, they have to take place on weekdays. And, there are handlers that have normal jobs, and they just have bosses that are flexible with them. It seems like a good key to success is if you work for yourself or own your own business, and if you're own boss, you can rearrange your work schedule. And one of the handlers who did a lot to help me with my research, that's the case with him. And he treks all over Texas with his dogs on different searches.
And is there a governing authority that certifies these dogs, or is it just based on the validation of the other canine handlers?
So there is at least one certifying body. Because I'm not a canine handler, I'm not as familiar with their certification process. In general terms, I could tell you how it works. The name of the certifying body, there's at least one. There may be more than one. Escapes me at the moment. And then there's also internal training within the team, making sure the dogs work well with other dogs. I was on a search once where two dogs hadn't worked together before, and one attacked the other, and I had my first dog patient because of that.
Wow. And can we get into the operational medicine around canines? So this is the situation where, like you just described, like a dog gets injured and you've got to go into medical treatment on the dog in the field. Can you just sort of describe what is canine operational medicine? Can you talk about what that means? Can you talk a little bit about the research that you've done in this area?
Absolutely. So just to give your listeners context, the operational medicine is just a term used to describe medicine practice in a setting that you're either far from definitive care, a hospital, you don't have normal resources, or you're far enough from normal urban EMS and hospitals that it justifies bending the rules a little, if you will, doing things that would normally be outside of one's scope of practice. It'd also be characterized by improvisation. If you go take a wilderness medicine course from Knowles, you'll learn how to improvise splints and C-collars and things of that nature. When it comes to the canines, advancements in this area have already been made by. It started in the military. A lot of medical research was done based off of experiences, the U.S. military's experiences in the global war on terror. And I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, that's where that period of time resulted in the military has a class called TCCC, Tactical Combat Casualty Care, and there's a Combat Casualty Care Committee, and that much of that was adopted into a civilian version called TEC. And as the military started using working dogs in the global war on terror, they're like, well, man, these dogs are an investment. They're really valuable. We go, bring them out on missions and they get shot or blown up or, hurt in some other way. And we want to keep them, alive and get them back, in service. Another committee was formed and they adapted the TCCC principles to K9s. There's some differences. A lot of it is the same. And on the civilian side, the same thing trickled down. You have on the civilian side, K9 tech, tactical emergency casualty care, where you learn how to basically do. Not that this makes you a paramedic, but you're doing a lot of skills that are at the paramedic level as well as basic skills below that. And you're learning to do that in a hostile environment where people could be shooting at you, and shooting at your patients. It's a really interesting class if you ever get the chance to take one. But in as far as civilian SAR goes, it is possible for a dog to get shot at, but typically IEDs and gunfire from insurgents is not what you're worried about. We've got two different kinds of dogs. There are human remains detection dogs, which are used to look for deceased persons' bones or complete bodies. And you have live find dogs. We do have some live find dogs, and they do get called out on live find searches occasionally. But the bread and butter of our work is with human remains detection dogs, HRD dogs. And they get called out for a number of scenarios where there are environmental hazards that could result in injury. They get called out in floods, when there could be deceased people trapped in debris under the water. Same thing for hurricane, wildfire. I've talked to handlers that have been brought in as a wildfire was being dealt with, and they'd go into a cold area that had, fire had come through there, and they're trying to identify bodies, and then there's the danger of smoke or fire, changing directions and coming at them, and the dogs could step on, debris that hurts them or embers, things of that nature. Tornadoes, other on water disasters, and responded to a plane crash once, working with K9s there, using them to try to find human remains after a plane went down. And of course, criminal investigations, which we do a lot of. And there are, to give you an idea of what we're talking about, we're talking about anything from local gangs to cartels. And, like the cartels have very elaborate ways of killing and torturing people, and then they bury them in these weird public places. And there's ritualistic markings.
I'm curious about the cartels. Is it common for them to divide the bodies up and only bury sections of people, or do you tend to find most of the time the bodies are intact?
My understanding from talking to handlers, and don't quote me on this, but my understanding is that often the bodies are dismembered, but they're all buried in one place. Okay, and then they arrange stuff. They leave tells that are very subtle, but they like to leave tells. We could also get called into. There's one canine handler explained to me why he started carrying fentanyl. Because he got called out to a search where there had been a bust in a drug house, but they also suspected that a person had been murdered and hid on the premises of the drug house. And the law enforcement brought him in, and it hadn't been fully sanitized yet, and it was an in-progress kind of thing. They wanted to work as in a timely manner. And there were booby traps at the scene. I don't remember exactly what booby traps. I think something like punji sticks, something of that nature, but I don't recall. But working crime scenes like these, it's possible for the dogs to encounter drugs that could mess them up. Even that search in an oil field I mentioned, there was I forget if it was an oil field or a natural gas field. It was one of those two. And the same handler, I was talking with him, and he told me that he noticed his dog behaving funny, like it had an altered level of consciousness. So he took it back to his truck. And, later he talked to a chemical engineer friend of his who explained, well, the gases being offlet, escaping in these fields, those could damage your dog's nose. Wow. And probably it was experiencing an altered level of consciousness because it was inhaling this stuff. And he found out that if the dog had been kept out too long, it would have destroyed his sense of smell, or at least, destroyed it to the point where it could have affected his ability to work. And when they're on these searches, whether it's something like that or a crime scene, they can encounter a number of hazards. A big incident that just happened is K9s got called out to assist law enforcement finding a body in a crime. And he brought one dog out, a new dog, that he's been training for a little while, and the dog was so enthusiastic. They were on a bridge. The dog jumped right out of the car and jumped over the bridge and fell, I think, something like 20 feet and injured itself. And fortunately, one of the police officers had taken a canine tech class for police canines, presumably, and scooped the dog up, and they, rushed it to a veterinary hospital running code in a squad car. You can also have hazards, like debris. I've heard you wouldn't think of this, but a lot of the dogs wear vests. And you wouldn't expect a dog to get a puncture wound this way. But I've had handlers tell me that, a dog's wearing a thick vest and it's, running through the woods, and a stick gets in between the dog and the vest, and the stick is, the vest is strong enough that stick, just ends up bending towards the animal's body and impaling it. And this one dog got a puncture wound in its, chest cavity because of something like that. And that's not something I would have thought would happen. But they can get injured in all kinds of ways. Heat injuries are the most common. But you do have, you do have other trauma like this.
Well, I can imagine, like, you're talking about that puncture wound, but I could imagine, like, tornadoes or even the aftermaths of, like, hurricanes or floods and things like that. You've got a lot of construction debris that's spread out all over the place. I mean, it only takes one misstep for the dog to step on a nail or something like that. So you've got to have all of the tools in your medical kit to make sure that you can easily triage that. But can you talk through, in your experience, like, what are some of the more common injuries that dogs will run into in the field? I'm assuming it's got to be a lot of paw-related injuries, right?
Yeah, splinters and cuts on paws. Their paws can also get burned on hot surfaces. Mm-hmm. Some canine handlers, they teach their dogs to get used to wearing boots, and they'll wear boots when they're out doing their searches to avoid injuries. They can eat something or drink something when they're out there that makes them ill. Like I said, heat injuries are the big thing. You have to be very careful monitoring the dog's heat. Snake bites, wild animals, if you're out in the middle of nowhere during hunting season, potentially gunshots. Then you got all kinds of weirdness at crime scenes, as I mentioned earlier. You could potentially come in contact with drugs. Maybe you got a guy hiding out who sees, hey, I recognizes that dog and recognizes this dog as being used to hit, go after a certain gang in a certain area. Maybe they try to go after the dog to stop the dog. Dogs are a really big deal. One handler's told me that his dog, Orion, after he first started working with this dog, and it had some really amazing successes, he would get calls from, unknown numbers from random law enforcement officers, random detectives, task forces, at all hours of the day and night, and they didn't know his name. They knew his dog's name. Hey, you the guy with a dog named Orion? Yeah. And they'd ask him to come out and work a search. for them. So the dog's really, that's the bread and butter of what we do. And a good dog can basically set the reputation for a team, because law enforcement knows the dog more than they know the handlers. And if you lose a good dog, it takes time to spin up another dog. And even if you get, handlers that are really serious about this, they'll raise dogs in phases. So when one gets old enough to retire, they have another one ready. But I believe that the dog's performance is a mix of both training and natural talent. And, even if you've got a good canine handler, you may not necessarily get, your second dog may not be as fantastic as the first, because it's a mix of both training and talent and the dog's personality.
Yeah. And I know you're not a handler, but I guess if maybe you have a perspective on this, but do you know, is there like somebody that's thinking about capacity planning and looking at the big picture of the dogs to say like, okay, related to TexSAR, we have 9 handlers with 7 really good dogs and 2 okay dogs, and in the future we think we need to have 16 dogs? Or is there anybody thinking that way, or is it just you guys sort of like just rely on the handlers to be there and manage that capacity, and it's not really thought about too much?
So there is some, like I alluded to earlier, there is some organization and oversight of each of the individual disciplines on the team. But to the level at which you're talking about, to the best of my knowledge, no. With TexSAR, if you want to be field deployable, you got to fulfill your basic requirements. You got to do, your NIMS and your ICS and your CPR and bleeding cert. And then you got to get your wilderness ground search, cert. And then you are field deployable and can do ground searches. And after that, it's a matter of what do you want to do? Do you want to do canine? Do you want to do medical? Do you want to do drone? Do you want to do wilderness fire or vertical? And you can do more than one. That just means you are making a greater commitment of time and money and keeping that stuff up. But the canine handlers are just, they join the team usually just to do dog stuff. A lot of them, they do the other disciplines too. And they're kind of in charge of their own, they're in charge of their dogs, to a great degree in terms of how many they're going to have, rotating them, the time and money they're putting into them. And they're often on their own when it comes to paying for veterinary expenses, which I think is a big reason to have a formalized canine operational medicine program, is to both reduce risk to the team, also reduce risk to the handler, and keep the dogs in service, bring them back into service more quickly, because a lot of these canine handlers, like it's like that guy who told me that all of them are single, like they're really serious about this. But I don't think you can take it for granted that every canine handler is going to have the time and money to have this long rotation of dogs and phases every 2 years and cycle through them. And you can't make the assumption that, someone's going to lose a dog, that was a significant investment of time and money as a volunteer, and then turn around and, expect them and they're going to instantly start working on another dog. And even if they do, it takes, I think, something like 2 years to train and get a dog certified. So it's a lengthy process, which is why I think preventing.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense, because if you look at it dispassionately, you say like, okay, one dog dies and then you just replace them with another, but that's not how it works, because these are family members of these handlers, so it's not like they can just keep a rotation going. And I would assume a lot of them sort of say like, all right, I need a year or two of a break before I get another puppy and start training. So another question I have, and I think you touched on this a little bit, but the canine handlers themselves, obviously, like their passion is probably more towards the training, and then they learn the medical piece to support the dog as a necessity. But I'm assuming, like, if it's not their passion to do the medical piece, then a specialist, somebody that's thinking about this like you, would be somebody you could rely on. But do you find that like the interaction with the dogs themselves and the temperament and the basics around getting the dog calm in the field to let somebody that's not the handler deal with them, do you get to actually get hands-on with the dog, or is it more around you telling the handler what they need to do in a certain situation because they're easier to get access to the dog to do medical treatments?
So I've responded to one injured dog on a mission, and I've had a teammate deal with it, and it seems like more of a collaborative effort in both cases. One more so in the second case than in the one that I was involved with. It wasn't a serious injury. They just said, "Hey, we got an injured dog. Can you call one of the medics over and take a look at the dog?" And the injury wasn't too serious, and we got it patched up. But I think it's important to explain, to answer the first part of your question. It's important to give a little bit of background here. So I did 2 research projects. The first research project was a independent study course that had to be specially authorized by the college. American Military University is where I was studying. And I had to find an instructor that was willing to supervise my research. And I got I got 3 hours of course credit for that, like a normal class. But I was basically doing a thesis without it being my thesis. And that loophole, it not being my thesis, made it easier for me to do what in academic circles is called human research. I'm not running experiments on people. What I was doing, and what that term refers to, is involving people in my research, doing surveys and interviews. So I did a couple of different things, human research elements in that first project. Like I said earlier, I identified 10 teams in Texas that I solicited for research. 4 of them responded. 3 of them actually participated in my surveys, and the majority of the handlers, because TexSAR is such a big team, I had something like 12 or 13 responses, individual responses, just from TexSAR. So this isn't that isn't ideal numbers. This wouldn't make it this wouldn't make it in peer-reviewed study. They'd be like, man, the numbers are off. There's more you got to do there, and you'd have to go through IRB, Institutional Review Board. But it's still, the results were basically common sense. I polled handlers on what kind of injuries have you seen based on severity, and I polled them on their background. And one thing I was curious about is how many of these, there's 2 classes that you can take, a canine first aid class and canine tech, like I talked about earlier. And canine first aid is going to be basic. But to my way of thinking, if you're trying to be as prepared as possible, you want to be operating at a higher level, especially when you are operating in remote areas where help may not be readily available. So how many of them are taking first aid? How many of them are taking tech? And what background do they have? Because as I mentioned, a layperson, and they do this, canine handler laypersons do this, is they'll go and take that class, but they are learning skills that are typically, used by paramedics. And to give your listeners some perspective, it took me a few months to get my EMT basic. It's basically the same amount of time as an associate's degree getting your paramedic. You're at a higher level there. And legally, you learn those skills and you do them on your dog, and you're doing them in good faith and not, intentionally abusing the animal. Legally, you can do that. And that's how a lot of handlers prepare. But from a medical standpoint, from an organizational standpoint, from a risk management standpoint, if you are trying to be thorough about this and, operate at a degree of excellence, you want to have a medical capacity for canines that is equivalent to, the same kind of medical capacity we have on the human side. Something closer to what I described law enforcement doing. Perhaps, you don't have paramedics because it's not very common in the volunteer side of things. But at least have people formally trained and with medical oversight to provide that care. And when I surveyed these handlers, I found that only a little over 18% of them reported having an EMS certification of EMR or higher. An EMR is a certification that's below EMT basic. And as I mentioned, I only saw 2 out of 10 volunteer teams in Texas advertising some kind of medical capability. And only a little over 6% of handlers reported having veterinary experience. And 25% said they took tech courses, and 43% said they took canine first aid courses. So just to recap there, you're talking not very many of them have human medical experience that could potentially carry over to canines. Even less of them have veterinary experience that's directly relevant to the animals. And you've got, 43% taking these basic courses, and a quarter of them taking these really advanced courses that they don't really have the background for. And they can take those classes, like I said, and by law, you can use those skills on your dog. I mean, unless you're obviously abusing it. But from an organizational perspective, if you're trying to provide, an excellent level of medical care, there needs to be some structure and oversight, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can base this a lot on the structures you see in human EMS. And it brings me to the other part of my human research. When I went out to Vegas to take a canine tech class, if I can just give a shout out real quick, I took my class with Joanne Brenner and caninemedic.com, and her team collaborated with a veterinary facility that provided us access to ethically sourced cadaver dogs, which made practicing invasive skills that was so incredibly valuable. When it comes to things like, if you know what needle decompression is, that's a skill that you could learn that on a stuffed animal, but it is not the same thing as doing it on a real dog. And, you're not going to have many opportunities to do that. So getting to practice on a cadaver is just invaluable. And while I was out there, I got to talk with Joanne Brenner and some of her other instructors, one of which was a veterinarian. So we had the human EMS side represented there, and we had the veterinary side represented down there. And I had started to come up with an outline of how I thought this problem should be addressed, and how do you develop a formal canine medical program as opposed to just this, ad hoc handlers taking a class here and there. And I got to sit down with them and get their feedback, and included that in my research. And I can't go fully into depth on developing a program here, but I can kind of give you a bit of an idea of what's involved in going from that ad hoc approach to a formal approach.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So in EMS, there's a concept called medical control, which is really important. And I know a lot of search and rescue teams, you're probably only operating with wilderness first aid certifications, or maybe wilderness first responder certifications. And of course, legally, at least in Texas, you can operate at that level without any oversight. But it still makes sense, especially if your team that has the resources, to have a medical director. And a medical director provides 2 kinds of oversight. They provide what's called offline medical control, where they basically standardize your protocols, what different levels of providers are allowed to do, and how they treat patients, in certain situations. And then you probably don't see this as much as in SAR, but in urban EMS, you have online medical control, where you can where you call in to get authorization to administer a certain medication, or maybe you don't. You're kind of unsure what to do in a situation, and you can call and you can get the doctor's advice. And there's I came across a couple of interesting academic articles talking about how in search and rescue, it's this niche area where it's kind of the Wild West, where it's just wilderness first aid and wilderness first responder certifications. And you can do that, but is that really striving for excellence? And these articles argued for bringing medical oversight into search and rescue, and that's what's involved in creating a canine medical program. So let's say if you're a team like TexSAR and you have medics and you have canine handlers, you could cross-train those medics to provide care, and you could train the handlers, because no one's going to be more interested in doing dog stuff than the dog guys and girls. You're probably going to get even more participants there than the medics. You may also have a lot of teams, like I said, the majority of the ones I identified, they didn't advertise a human medical capability. So in a situation like TexSAR, where you already have a medical team, a human medical team, and you got canines, what you do is you get your human medical director to coordinate and partner with a veterinary doctor. So you have medical control on the human side, you got medical control on the dog side of it, and they get together and they decide, okay, we got medics, operating at this level of certification, and then we got handlers. They come up with, what we call scope of practice. What skills is, the different level of providers, what are they allowed to do? They flesh that out. And then ideally the canine medical director is providing resources like ethically sourced cadavers and clinical rotations. I did a lot of research on medical skill retention, too much to really delve in here. But the point is that a lot of the studies that I read, and I cross-referenced them, the conclusion that became obvious is that even the common practice of a 2 or 3 year research interval on something like a wilderness first aid certification, it's not adequate, and it may seem adequate if you test people after 2 years, with a written test, a multiple choice test. But retention of didactic knowledge does not equate to adequately retaining your ability to actually perform skills. It doesn't equate to competence. They are two different things, and they need to be measured differently. And a big component to making sure that people can actually perform skills is to give them quality initial training. Like I mentioned with Canine Medic, that was a fantastic opportunity to work with cadavers. Really helped you understand what you're doing there and how to do it and be confident in it. And then you need an opportunity to practice. That's where clinical rotations come in. That's where the veterinarian, that director may set, some requirements for continuing education, continuing practice. Another thing in particular to get experience that I've pitched to, that I'm pitching to my team, is to develop this into a discipline, just like the medical team, just like the canine team, and offer this service to outside agencies. That would raise awareness of our team, potentially open up new sponsor and grant opportunities. It would also spread awareness of this kind of niche area, one of the last frontiers of medicine, and maybe get more people thinking and talking about it and adapting it. And I'll say one of the last big pieces here I want to make sure that I mentioned is HEMS, helicopter emergency medicine. So the problem that some people may ask, you got a dog, it's doing first responder stuff, it gets injured, why can't you call an ambulance and just ask them to take it to a veterinary hospital? In most states, with the exception of 2, and this could have changed since the research I read, except for 2 states, if you are paid to provide medical care for an animal and you're not licensed to practice veterinary medicine, you run the risk of being charged with practicing veterinary medicine without a license.
Even in the course of a search and rescue situation?
So that's where being paid is what makes the difference.
Okay.
Yeah. Or maybe not even directly charging for it, but being paid, you run the risk of practicing veterinary medicine without a license. And initially, as I was beginning my research, I thought, well, if you can't do this and get paid, there's no way HEMS or urban EMS is going to do this. But the obvious loophole is that they can do this, at least in Texas, if they do it for free. And I never imagined that would be a thing, but it is. Here in Houston, we have Memorial Hermann and Memorial Hermann Life Flight. And I attended one of their Red Duke trauma symposiums and got to meet with the head of their newly formed Canine Tech program. And this is a program where they cross-trained life flight medics and nurses to adapt their skills to providing care for canines. And the obvious application there is police dogs. That's what most people would think about. But when I got a chance to talk with them and said, hey, this is who I work with. This is what we do. If one of our dogs got injured, would you be willing to help us? And absolutely. They will transport an injured working dog free of charge within a particular service area. I forget how big it is, but it's a relatively big radius. Not compared to the whole state of Texas, but it's pretty significant. And they have partnered with 4 different veterinary hospitals so that they can take their helicopter in and land it and deliver a dog to them if a working dog, whether it's police or search and rescue, gets injured. And I don't think this is very common knowledge. And in doing my research, I came across studies that referenced this database called ADAMS, and it was a database of air medical providers. And it provided a lot of information that was useful for studying things related to HEMS. And there was one study in particular that was a study on how many HEMS agencies had transported canines. And I don't have those figures on hand. I would have thought the number was 0, but it wasn't. There was actually a significant number that had transported canines, and some that even had written policies on on what's involved in this, and policies and procedures, that kind of thing. Unfortunately, that database, it no longer exists. I tried to access it for myself, and it doesn't seem to exist anymore. So another thing that I've pitched to my team that I think is an important component of building a canine medical program after you've got that canine medical director is we'll have to do our own research. Basically do our research, reach out, use the internet, talk to regional offices of emergency management and try to perhaps get assistance from them, and identify HEMS providers in our service area, which in our case is the whole state of Texas. That's a lot of area. But it would take time. But if we map this out and identify all these providers and reach out to them and ask, hey, we got a working dog that goes down. Are you willing to transport? And build out a list, build out a map of these. A map would be very useful for what we call medical incident planning. Before a mission, you do medical incident planning to plan for the what if, so you're not scratching your head and panicking when something happens. Yeah. And if we build our own database like that, a map, that would be critical. And groups like Life Flight, they're going above and beyond just transporting. They're also doing training. If you have an agency approach them and say, hey, we've got working dogs, we're trying to get prepared on the medical side, will you train us? They have training available. In my opinion, from the research I've done, that's great. It's still not a replacement for having a medical director. And if you have human EMS, having that combo, if not, just having that veterinary doctor. But it's a great start, even if, someone from a small team is listening and it's like 4 or 5 people with the dogs and they don't have, the kind of resources that, I'm talking about. it would still be great if you just, did a little bit of Googling and identified HEMS providers in your working area and reached out to them and find out, hey, what do you do? Will you transport our dogs? Do you provide any training? And you may even get free training from them. And especially if you're a small team with less resources, that could be very helpful.
Yeah, and I think that it's an important area to think about, and it's not something that I think is thought about too often. I feel like in your area down in Texas, you probably, the use cases for search and rescue are probably more heavily reliant on dogs than maybe up here in New Hampshire, but it is a good thing for us to be thinking about and for to just sort of talk about, because it's just not something that you consider. You sort of figure like, okay, if the dog gets injured, we're going to just pick the dog up and take him to the local veterinary. But in New Hampshire, small, so like that may be viable. But where you're talking about in Texas, like you could be. I'm just like looking at a map as you're talking, and I'm just looking at the distance between Houston and say like Beaumont, Texas, and then north of there, you've got Sam Houston National Forest, you've got Angelina National Forest, Davy Crockett National Forest. I mean, those areas are huge. I mean, those comprise almost the entire state of Massachusetts. So the distance you're talking about is crazy.
Yeah, I was looking up some data here. Texas is 29 times bigger than New Hampshire.
Wow.
So you're talking it's just massive.
Here's another use case you may not have thought of. This wasn't directly relevant to my research, but I thought it was interesting. I want to say this is someplace in California. I want to say, I don't remember for sure, but I read online, you can probably Google it and find it, about a team of volunteers that they're basically dog SAR. So they got hikers that, you get hikers, going down up trails, in their flip-flops and no water, that aren't prepared. And those same people are often bringing animals with them. And then the animal gets out there, gets its paw injured, it gets, its leg injured, falls, gets scraped on something, starts to overheat, and they're not equipped. And I can't remember what city this was in, but I want to say it was California. I read about a team that I don't know what their level of training was, but they trained to go out and assist hikers on these trails when they aren't prepared, and they bring a pet out there that just isn't prepared for the adventure.
Yeah, we've had a number of episodes where we've highlighted this, because what happens in New Hampshire is that like we have very sharp rocks, and it's pretty common, not common, but it happens relatively consistently a couple times a year where a hiker will bring typically large breed dogs that will, their paws will get torn up and they'll be in a place where they can't continue. And search and rescue does not by policy come in to save the dog. So it's volunteer. Like usually it's over social media where they'll mobilize teams to come out and sort of carry the dogs out. And there's a product called Pack-A-Paw, which is a sling that allows people to carry the dogs. And it's relatively common. I think we've had probably about 4 or 5 of those rescues over the last couple of years since we've been doing the show, where dogs have gotten in trouble. So right now in New Hampshire, there's a small group that's starting up that's a volunteer search and rescue specifically to come out and help with animals.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, but Ken, this has been fascinating. Stomp, is there any other questions that you have that you want to cover?
Yeah, just briefly. So I was rifling through the TexSAR.org website. It's very impressive. I was looking at some of the numbers. So you guys have 230 active personnel statewide. And 5 divisions or branches?
Yes, yeah, we're statewide.
Okay, so 125 are labeled as wilderness SAR technicians. So up here in the Northeast, we generally do what they call is a shakedown, where we take them out and take them on a vigorous hike and this and that. Do you guys do anything similar for the wilderness search and rescue?
So our process has changed. I wasn't here when the team was started, but my understanding of the lore, if you will, is it started out as one team that got the idea to unite individual SAR teams across Texas into something bigger, and it's gotten more professional over time. Understandably, you start out with an endeavor like that it takes time, but we've gotten more and more professional. And at this point, you have, like I said, you have the minimum requirements. You got to be willing to do the really dry, boring NIMS and ICS stuff. And we get a lot of people that they come to 1 or 2 meetings, they're all gung-ho about it. They pay the membership fee, and then they never complete that stuff. And that stuff is free. It's just super dry, and it takes some time. Then you got to do your wilderness first aid, not your wilderness first aid. You got to take your wilderness ground search class. And once you do that, there is a probationary period, which is something that we've implemented. Try to get them out, try to get new members out on searches, and try to pair them up with more experienced team members. I've gotten to mentor a few young men that have joined the team. That was rewarding. And then of course, you show yourself that you're competent, you stay calm, behave yourself, act professionally, and then you make it out of that probationary period. So there's not necessarily a wilderness shakedown. There is a practical exercise component to that basic required wilderness ground search class, and there's ongoing training after that. But there's not really a take them out to Big Bend on a 7-day hike, through the desert kind of thing. No, that's not a requirement at this point.
Do you, what's your turnover like? And I want to tie that to, is Texas in general properly served by volunteer search and rescue, or is it underserved? Do you have a high turnover in members, or I also noticed. Go ahead. Yeah, that's fine. This may be a little off topic, but do you have any
it's
insight?
An interesting question.
Yeah.
So I don't have specific insight into the specific stats for our team, and if I did, I'm not sure if that's something they would want me to share. However, I can tell you that I have heard more than one division leader or instructor say that the average lifespan of a volunteer is I want to say 3 years. So, as I mentioned before, you get these new people that come in that they're all gung ho, and they don't do the basic classes, and then they just disappear. That's the majority of people. Then you get less people that actually follow through with that, actually go on missions, and then a lot of those, after 3 years, they'll either move because of their job, or they'll have kids. Sure. And it's very important to have a supportive spouse in this. And I've heard that from canine handlers. It's very important to have a supportive spouse. I've been fortunate that mine, even after we have had our first kid, she's about to turn 1. She's still supportive of me staying involved with this. But a lot of folks, for whatever reason, either because of life changes or burnout, they drop off. And then you've got like a few hardcore people that just keep going and going and going.
Yeah. I could ask you a million questions because I'm in volunteer SAR myself. I guess just for time, I'll ask you one other thing. I noticed that a lot of the handlers, according to your data here, it would look as though you're talking about 2 dogs per handler. Is that accurate?
I don't have a number on dogs per handler. I don't have that. I can tell you that a lot of them have had at least 2. Like I said, the ones that have been doing this a while, and you get new folks that show up that are interested in it, and they have a dog that's a pet, which pets are great, and they're interested in doing it, and they don't really understand how much work is involved in it, and they'll probably drop off. Then you've got some folks that won't drop off, and they'll stick with it, but they may not get to the level of the folks I've been talking about that have done this for years, the ones that are single, that that train rotations of dogs. They train one dog, wait 2 years, start bringing up another dog, wait 2 years, start bringing up another dog, and then you got this full rotation. And then when a dog gets to a certain age, it's often used as a confirmation dog. So when a dog ages out and it's not physically capable of doing the more strenuous work, you'll use it as a confirmation dog, or you'll have one or two other dogs, maybe more, hit on a scent, but those dogs aren't as seasoned as this dog, and maybe they don't have the reputation, the track record of performance that this one does, and you'll bring the confirmation dog out to see if the confirmation dog hits on a scent there. And if the confirmation dog hits on it, you should take it seriously. If he doesn't, it's probably a mistake.
That's great.
Ken, thank you so much. It's been super interesting. And yeah, eventually we got to get you up into the mountains of New Hampshire. They're not super tall, but they are, they're very frisky and difficult. So I feel like Texas is super flat.
My dad grew up there, and he's told me stories from his childhood of hunting and getting into trouble. And he had property out there for a while, but he sold it. And so yeah, I got an excuse to go out there. It'd be fun.
Amazing. Well, this has been fantastic. So thank you very much for your service as a volunteer SAR, and pass on a thank you to the team members, and appreciate your time joining us tonight.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to learn more about the topics covered in today's show, please check out the show notes and safety information at SLASRPodcast.com. That's SLASRPodcast.com. You can also follow the show on Facebook and Instagram. We hope you'll join us next week for another great show. Until then, on behalf of Mike and Stomp, get out there and crush some mega peaks.
Now covered in scratches, blisters, and bug bites, Chris Staff wanted to complete his most challenging day hike ever.
Fish and Game officers say the hiker from Florida activated an emergency beacon yesterday morning. He was hiking along the Appalachian Trail when the weather started to get worse. Officials say the snow was piled up to 3 feet in some spots, and there was a wind chill of -1 degree.
And there's 3 words to describe this race. Do we all know what they are?
Lieutenant James Nealon, New Hampshire Fish and Game. Lieutenant, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
What are some of the most common mistakes you see people make when they're heading out on the trails to hike here in New Hampshire?
It seems to me the most common is being unprepared, and I think if they just simply visited hikesafe.com and got a list of the 10 essential items and had those in their packs, they probably would